He thought it was just another ordinary evening. A young boy, walking along the side of the road, spotted a car stranded with a flat tire. Inside sat a wealthy man, frustrated and waiting for help. With kindness in his heart, the boy stepped forward to lend a hand, never imagining that this simple act of generosity would unravel into something far bigger than himself. What should have been a small moment of gratitude quickly turned into a test of dignity, prejudice, and fate. Because what happened next didn't just change the boy's night, it changed the entire course of his life. And the truth of that encounter will leave you questioning the very world we live in today. Jamal was just 12 years old, but life had already given him responsibilities far greater than most boys his age. He lived with his mother in a small, weathered apartment building on the edge of town. His father had passed away years before, leaving his mother to shoulder the weight of raising him alone. She worked long hours at a diner, her hands calloused from scrubbing dishes and her feet sore from standing all day. Yet every evening when she came home, she still managed to smile for Jamal, because he was her reason to keep pushing forward. Though money was tight, Jamal was rich in determination. He helped his mother whenever he could, running errands, keeping the apartment clean, and watching over his younger cousins when family stopped by. For him, responsibility wasn't a burden, it was a way of showing love. But even with his small frame and boyish face, Jamal carried an awareness that many children never had to confront. He knew the world looked at him differently. His mother warned him in quiet moments, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound strong. People will judge you before they know you. You have to stay calm, stay smart, and never let them take your dignity. It was a lesson etched into his heart. That night, Jamal was walking home from the grocery store, his backpack light but important milk, bread, and a few apples, essentials his mother had trusted him to bring back safely. The streets were quiet, lit by scattered lamps that flickered in the evening breeze. The air was thick with the smell of asphalt cooling after a hot day. Jamal adjusted the straps of his bag, his mind on home. That's when he saw it? A sleek, black luxury car sat pulled over on the side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked faintly, the orange glow cutting through the dimness. A man in a tailored suit stood beside it, pacing in frustration as he examined a flat tire. His expensive watch glimmered under the streetlight, his polished shoes scuffing against the gravel. Jamal hesitated. He wasn't the type to approach strangers, especially ones who looked like they had everything. But something inside him nudged forward. The man looked stranded, and Jamal knew what that felt like. Alone, stuck, wishing someone would notice. He took a cautious step, then another. "Excuse me, sir," Jamal said softly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. "Do you need help?" The man turned, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Jamal. For a moment, silence. Then, with a dismissive wave, he muttered, "No, I've got it under control." But Jamal could see the frustration etched in the man's face, the helpless way he glanced at the car. And something told him the man didn't have it under control at all. "Sir, I know how to change a tire," Jamal offered gently, setting his grocery bag down. The man studied him, clearly skeptical. But after a long sigh, he stepped aside. "Fine, if you think you can." Jamal knelt beside the car, his heart pounding, determination pushing him forward. He didn't know it yet, but this small choice, to help when he didn't have to, would change everything. The man in the suit looked at Jamal with a mixture of surprise and irritation. At first glance, he seemed the type who rarely accepted help, especially from someone like Jamal, a boy in worn sneakers, holding a grocery bag instead of tools. His eyes flicked up and down, scanning Jamal as though measuring his worth in that single instant. "I'm fine," the man muttered, brushing him off, but the way his gaze lingered betrayed his frustration. The tire was flat, the car useless, and the road was quiet with no one else in sight. Jamal could feel the weight of that moment pressing down. He could walk away, let the man wrestle with his problem alone, or he could push through the rejection and offer more. "Sir, I know how to change a tire," Jamal said softly, setting his grocery bag down. His voice carried no arrogance, only sincerity. The man raised a brow, clearly skeptical, but something in Jamal's steady tone made him pause. After a long sigh, he stepped aside. Fine, if you think you can. Jamal knelt beside the car. His small hands gripped the tools awkwardly at first, but muscle memory took over. He'd helped his uncle with cars more than once. The bolts groaned as he loosened them, the weight of the tire straining his arms. Still, he pressed on, determined to prove himself. As Jamal worked, he could feel the man's eyes on him. Not just curious, but judgmental, like he was waiting for the boy to fail. That silent scrutiny burned hotter than the fading sun. But Jamal stayed focused, sweat forming on his brow, his movements precise and careful. Finally, with effort, he lifted the spare into place and tightened the bolts. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands, his chest heaving with pride and exhaustion. "There you go, sir." "Good as new." For a moment, silence. The man stared at him, expression unreadable. Then came a smirk, not one of gratitude, but of condescension. "Not bad. For a kid like you." The words stung. Jamal forced a polite smile, but inside, something cracked. "For a kid like you." The phrase echoed in his mind, dripping with the kind of prejudice he had learned to recognize, even at his young age. He expected a thank you, maybe even a handshake. Instead, the man pulled a wallet from his pocket, flicked out a few bills, and held them out between two fingers. "Here, for your trouble." Jamal froze. The money dangled in the air, but he couldn't bring himself to take it. His mother had always told him, "Help because it's right, not because of what you'll get." To accept the money would cheapen what he had just done. But more than that, it was the way the man offered it, like tossing scraps to someone beneath him, that made Jamal's stomach twist. "Thank you, sir," Jamal said, his voice steady, "but I don't need money. I just wanted to help." The man's smirk faded into something colder. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a hint of anger flashed across his face. "Don't be foolish, take it." Again Jamal shook his head. His refusal, though polite, was firm. That small act of dignity, of saying no, shifted the air between them. The man's posture stiffened, his pride wounded. How could a poor boy, someone he deemed insignificant, dare reject him? The tension was thick when headlights suddenly swept across the road. A police cruiser slowed, its siren chirping briefly before pulling up behind the stranded car. The officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of swagger that spoke of authority long abused. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, eyeing the scene. Before Jamal could answer, the suited man spoke first, his tone sharp and defensive. "This boy was loitering around my car. Claimed he was trying to help, but I don't know what he was really up to." The words struck Jamal like a punch. His mouth opened to protest, but the officer's stare pinned him in place. That cold, assessing look he knew too well, the look that decided guilt before innocence could speak. "Is that right, kid?" the officer asked, his hand resting casually on his belt, far too close to his holster. Jamal's voice trembled, but he forced the truth out. "I changed his tire, that's all. I was just trying to help." The officer glanced at the man, who crossed his arms, feigning unease. "I don't know," the man said. "When I got back to my car, he was already here. Could have been looking to steal something." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Jamal's heart pounded, his palms slick with sweat. He felt invisible, powerless, as though his words carried no weight against the testimony of a wealthy man in a suit. The officer stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Jamal whole. "You got ID, boy?" Jamal shook his head. At his age, he had none. The officer's lips curled into a thin smile, one that carried no warmth. Convenient. Jamal's mind raced. Should he run? Should he argue? Every instinct screamed at him to stay calm, to remember what his mother had taught him. Don't move too fast, don't raise your voice, and don't give them a reason. But deep down, he knew that sometimes even silence could be turned against him. The officer leaned down, his voice low and sharp. "Boys like you don't just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. You make trouble." Jamal swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to scream that he had done nothing wrong, that he had only helped, but the words caught in his chest. His story didn't matter here. Not against their assumptions. Behind him, the cruiser's lights pulsed against the trees, red and blue shadows flickering like a warning. The road, once calm, now felt like a stage where his dignity was being stripped piece by piece. The suited man said nothing more, but the damage was done. His accusation had planted the seed, and the officer seemed eager to water it. Jamal stood frozen, his heart hammering, knowing the night was far from over. Because sometimes injustice doesn't roar all at once. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, word by word, until it swallows everything. And for Jamal, the first bite had already been taken. The officer's hand hovered near his holster, fingers twitching with a readiness that made Jamal's chest tighten. The weight of the moment pressed down harder than the darkness gathering around the road. One wrong glance, one wrong move, and his life could spiral into headlines, into hashtags, into a story that no one would truly believe until it was too late. "Step back from the vehicle," the officer barked, his voice sharp, slicing through the humid air. Jamal obeyed, his legs trembling as he took slow steps away from the car. His mind replayed every warning his mother had ever whispered. "Keep your head down. Don't talk back. Don't give them a reason." He had done everything right, and still, here he was, treated as if his very existence was a crime. The suited man stood with folded arms, watching like an indifferent spectator. His silence was louder than any accusation, his posture radiating smug satisfaction. To him, this was no tragedy, it was power reaffirmed. He didn't have to say another word. The officer was already carrying out the judgment. "Hands where I can see them," the officer ordered. Jamal lifted his arms, his throat tightening and his palms slick with sweat. His grocery bag sat forgotten on the ground, its contents bread, a carton of milk, a few apples. Spilled out across the dirt, a picture of innocence ignored. The officer stepped closer, circling him like prey. "What were you doing here, boy?" Jamal's voice cracked as he tried to steady it. I changed his tire, that's all. I just wanted to help." The officer tilted his head, as if amused by the simplicity of the answer. His eyes narrowed, studying Jamal with a suspicion carved deep into habit. "Funny, men like him don't need your kind of help?" The word sliced deeper than the sharpest blade. Jamal bit his tongue, fighting the tears that burned his eyes. He wanted to scream, to demand fairness, to prove his worth, but he knew that in this moment, his silence was the only shield he had. The officer moved closer still, so close Jamal could smell the faint scent of tobacco on his uniform. "Tell me why you're really here. Were you looking inside the car? Planning to take something?" "No, sir," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling but firm. "Don't lie to me," the officer snapped, his hand tightening on the grip of his weapon. Time slowed. Jamal's heartbeat pounded in his ears like a drum of survival, each thud louder than the last. He thought of his mother waiting at home, of the weight of responsibility he carried at such a young age, of how unfair it was that kindness could be twisted into suspicion. The suited man's smirk deepened, his silence granting permission for the narrative to continue against Jamal. Every second felt like a test, one he was doomed to fail. The officer pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around." Jamal's chest clenched. The world blurred around him, fear clouding his vision. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, about to be marked, branded, defined by a crime that didn't exist. He turned slowly, his small frame shivering under the weight of judgment. The cold metal pressed against his wrists, biting into his skin as the cuffs clicked shut. The sound echoed in the night, louder than the crickets, louder than the rustle of leaves. In that moment, Jamal felt stripped of everything, his dignity, his innocence, his humanity. The officer shoved him forward, forcing him toward the back of the cruiser. His sneakers scraped against the gravel, his body stumbling under the force. Behind him, the suited man adjusted his tie, his expression one of detached satisfaction. To him, this was nothing more than a momentary inconvenience resolved. But to Jamal, it was the unraveling of his world. The officer pushed him against the car, the flashing red and blue lights painting his skin in fractured colors. "You should know better than to mess around here," the officer growled. Jamal's eyes welled with tears. He wanted to shout, to beg, to demand someone listen, but the words lodged in his throat. Who would believe him? A boy from a poor neighborhood against the word of a wealthy man and an officer? As the officer opened the cruiser door, Jamal caught his reflection in the window. His face looked smaller, weaker, swallowed by fear. He barely recognized himself. And then, just as he was about to be shoved inside, another pair of headlights appeared down the road. A sleek car slowed, pulling to a stop just behind the cruiser. From it stepped a woman, tall, confident, with an air of authority that made even the officer hesitate. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice firm, commanding. The officer straightened, his hand dropping from Jamal's shoulder. "Just handling a situation, ma'am." This boy was loitering around, but the woman's eyes narrowed as she scanned the scene. The spilled groceries, the clean hands smeared with grease from a changed tire, the fear etched across Jamal's young face. Her gaze then shifted to the suited man, who shifted uncomfortably under her stare. "Is that so?" she asked slowly, her voice edged with doubt. The officer cleared his throat, suddenly less sure of himself. "That's correct. He was interfering with this gentleman's vehicle." The woman crossed her arms, her eyes locked on Jamal. "And yet it looks to me like he was the only one who actually fixed it." The words hung heavy, slicing through the false narrative like a blade. Jamal's breath caught, a flicker of hope sparking in the darkness. The officer shifted uneasily, his authority challenged. The suited man's smirk faltered, his arrogance beginning to crack. Jamal stood frozen, his wrists still bound, his heart pounding with the force of survival and disbelief. Was this woman his savior, or would her voice be drowned out by the system that had already branded him guilty? The night held its breath, every shadow waiting for the next move. Because in that single moment, everything teetered on the edge. Would the truth finally break through the weight of prejudice? Or would Jamal's story become another name whispered in sorrow, another injustice swallowed by silence? The woman's presence shifted the air. Authority radiated from her posture, and though the officer bristled at being questioned, he couldn't ignore the weight she carried. She stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "Take those cuffs off him, now." For a moment, silence stretched. The officer hesitated, torn between his instinct to defend his authority and the unshakable certainty in her command. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, he unlocked the cuffs. The metal slipped from Jamal's wrists, leaving faint red marks that burned deeper than any wound. Jamal rubbed his wrists, his breath unsteady. Relief coursed through him, but so did exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a weight far too heavy for someone his age. He had walked into this night as a boy simply trying to do well. He would leave it changed, forced to see the world's cruelty more clearly than ever before. The suited man shifted uncomfortably, his earlier smirk gone. Under the woman's unrelenting gaze, he muttered, "It was just a misunderstanding." But Jamal knew better. The venom of those accusations, the way the officer had leapt to believe the worst, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a mirror of the world he lived in, where skin color dictated suspicion and kindness was twisted into guilt. The woman helped Jamal gather his spilled groceries. "Go home, son," she said softly, her voice carrying both strength and sorrow. "And don't